What's up everyone? I have a really nice video for you guys today. Now it goes without saying that working on super loud builds is incredibly annoying. Silence has never felt better, hasn't it? So that's why today I'll be showing to you quiet alternatives to typically very noisy circuits that are at the core of all of your redstone contraptions. Now, of course, if you want to build any of these, there's a free world download in the description. Anyways, to do that, we must first look at our prohibited items. Items that are super noisy. Now, obviously, we got the dropper and the dispenser. Obviously, pistons, skulk sensors, trapdoors, copper bulbs, because yes, these guys make a little bit of noise. And then, surprisingly, pistons and levers. We're really trying to go for an all quiet build here. So now you might be wondering, if we're not using buttons or levers, then how are we gonna interact with our redstone? Well, by hopefully finding a quiet alternative with our list of approved items. Items that are completely quiet in the use that we make of them. So first we have repeaters and comparators. Comparators, as long as we don't use them as levers, because they make noise, they're completely quiet. Observers, completely quiet. Redstone lamps, completely quiet. Daylight sensor, which is also completely quiet. Hoppers, completely quiet. Then note blocks, if we put something on it, preferably a candle because it's small, it's also completely quiet. And then obviously we have redstone torch, redstone dust, and rails. So first, let's start with our interface. Replacements for buttons and levers. So first up, we have the button. Now the button is something that you can click and it outputs a pulse of redstone. But it makes noise. So instead we have this. Now when we click a note block, and that unfortunately only works in Java, well, our observer detects the note block, that we click the note block, and it outputs a pulse. And you can add a pulse extender like this one if you want to have the same pulse duration than a button. So it's pretty much the exact same thing, but completely quiet. And then we have the lever. Now the lever is something you can click and it toggles on, and then it sends a signal until you turn it back off again. Now this one is a little bit more of a challenge. Now we have the daylight sensor that's toggleable, but it only works indoors because otherwise it's going to be affected by the time of day. Now in the world here where it's always noon and the world doesn't advance time, it works. But in a world where you have time that advanced, unfortunately it will only work indoors where it's not affected by daylight. Now let's move on to our indispensable circuits. So of course, first up we have our classic piston gate. That piston essentially connects or disconnects that lever here. So if it's disconnected, well, the signal does not reach the lamp. And if I connect it, well, then the signal reaches the lamp. That's why it's called an AND gate, because we need both levers to be on in order for the lamp to turn on. Now the first and easier to understand alternative to this one is using redstone torches. You see, for the line here to unpower and that redstone torch here to be able to power on the lamp, well, both redstone torches need to be off. If we turn only one off, well, it's not going to do anything because the other one is always going to be powering it on. So we need both of them to be turned off in order for the lamp here to turn on. Now here's another slightly more compact AND gate. This one, I love it. It's my favorite. I use it all the time instead of the piston because of how compact it is. So the way that this one works is by using a comparator in subtraction mode. And you see, a comparator in subtraction mode, if you input a signal strength of 15 coming in from the side using a repeater here, it's going to block all signal coming in from its input. So you can see it's extremely similar from the piston in that it blocks the signal when you turn it on. So it's essentially the same thing as the piston, but even more compact and without having to deal with the quasi-connectivity of the piston. Now onto our third indispensable circuit, the monostable circuit. Now personally, I call this a pulse shortener because it only outputs a 1 tick pulse regardless of the length of the pulse that comes in. So you can power it off and power it back on again if you want to have another pulse. You can also call it a rising edge detector. Anyways, it's a classic and it's indispensable in a lot of Redstone builds. Now our first quiet alternative for this one is using the comparator in subtraction mode. The same little circuit we had going on there before. So the way that one works is that the signal reaches the comparator first, so it outputs the signal for a short amount of time before with the repeater here catches up to it and blocks the signal. So you see when I power it on, it outputs a small pulse and then it powers off. The only caveat of this one is that it outputs a 2 tick pulse and not a 1 tick pulse. But the solution is pretty simple. You can only put an observer at the output and now it's going to be a 1 tick pulse. Now if you need a 1 block wide alternative to this one, well, we have this one right here made with redstone torches. You see, the way that this one works is that it unpowers that torch first, leaving that torch to turn on, but then the signal catches up to it and then powers it off again. You see this small pulse here. But the same way that this one outputs a 2 tick pulse, this one also outputs a 2 tick pulse. So you can do the same thing, put an observer if you want a 1 tick pulse. But for most of the circuits that we're going to have here, pistonless, we do not need 1 tick pulses. So it's very rare that you're going to need that, and the output here is perfectly fine. Now onto another classic, the toggle flip-flop. This one is truly indispensable for any type of serious redstone builds. And you can see it's made from a monostable circuit and a piston spitting out its block. But it's also one of the loudest redstone builds out there. Now, of course, Mojang recently added a really nice update for us redstoners, and that is the copper bulb, of course. But it still makes noise. And that brings me to our first completely quiet alternative. Now, the way that this one works is with a locking repeater. You see, the way that this one works is that each time you press on that button here, the locking repeater unlocks momentarily. So you see it, each time I press on it, it unlocks momentarily, allowing it to change its state. And its new state is going to depend on if it receives power from our comparator here when it's unlocked or not. So you see right now our comparator does not have any power going into its side, so it will power the repeater when it's going to unlock. But you see, when our repeater is powered here, well, it powers the comparator, which is gonna now block the signal, not powering the repeater the next time I'm going to press on the button. So here we have it, a completely silent toggle flip-flop that also works in Bedrock Edition. Now this flip-flop right here is really nice. It doesn't really get better than this, but I still figured I'd show you guys this one. Now it's a little bit more complicated than the other one, but it's significantly faster. So I figured I'd show you guys this one also. Now on a similar note from the flip-flops, we also have this mechanism right here, which is also a flip-flop, but that has dedicated on and dedicated off button. So if I press this button, it's gonna turn on, and no matter when I press it or how I press it, it's always gonna be on, and this one turns it off. Now this circuit is also pretty indispensable in a lot of redstone builds, so there's also a quiet alternative to it. Now the way that that one works is actually quite similar to the pistons. So you can see there's a dedicated off button as in there's a dedicated on button. So the way that this one works is you see there's a repeater with a comparator here that just loop around the signal. So if I pulse it here, well, it's just gonna loop around indefinitely, making it locked on. But if I pulse the comparator here on its side, well, it's gonna block the signal momentarily, turning off the loop right here. Now, of course, nothing is complete without a piston feed tape alternative. Now, I'm sure that plenty of you guys uses these in your builds with redstone blocks to select or to count, essentially, different outputs. So you can see each time I press the button, well, that redstone blocks shifts one block to this side right here, and eventually when I reach the end, well, the other redstone block here is going to take over, essentially putting it back to 0. Now, for all of you electronics nerds out there that commented about I squared C on my last video, yes, you can call this a shift register. I've said it, no need to blast me in the comments. Now, the quiet alternative to the piston feed tape is actually quite simple. I'm making the use of locked repeaters once again. So the way that this one works is that each time that I press the button here, it's gonna unlock the repeaters for just enough time for the signal to jump to the next repeater. So if I do it here, you can see it. It has just the time to jump for the next repeater. And because I have a redstone line looping around it, well, just like the piston feed tape over here, once I'm gonna reach the end, well, it's gonna go back to the beginning right here. And it also has a lot of advantage compared to the piston feed tape. One of them is that with piston feed tapes, you're pretty much limited to the push limits of pistons. Now, of course, you can put extensions and stuff like that, but it gets complicated real fast. Whereas these ones, they can go forever. They can go forever. You don't have any like push limits or anything. So that's pretty practical. And also, it's significantly faster than the feed tape. And with that, I think it's pretty much it. And of course, if I forgot about some small, usually very noisy little circuits that are indispensable for a redstone contraption, well, please respectfully let me know in the comments. And I'll try to cover it in a part 2. And with that said, don't forget that there is a free world download in the description. So if you want to build any of these, make sure to go grab it. And with that said, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, well, please leave a like, and if you want to see other content like this, well, subscribe. And with that, I'll catch you guys in the next one.